I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Why are we looking down on our sisters and brothers? Isn't love all that we got? Don't we know everyone's got a father and mother? The day we know we're all the same, together we can make that change. Look around, there are too many of us crying, and not enough left to go round. What a waste, another day, another good one dying. But I know that the world will change the day we know we're all the same. Why can't we just get along? If loving one another's wrong, then how are we supposed to get close to each other? We've got to make that change, yeah. Why can't we just get along? Whoa. What a waste it would be to deny somebody of a chance to be themselves. Yeah. What a waste it would be if we heard for nothing. But I know that the world will change the day we know we're all the same. Why can't we just get along? Why can't we just if loving one another's wrong, why can't we just then how are we supposed to get close to each other? We've got to make that change, yeah. I know we could break apart. We don't have to go that way. Not today. Ooh. Why can't we just get along? If loving one another's wrong, then how are we supposed to get close to each other? We've got to make that change, yeah. Why can't we just get along? If loving one another's wrong, why can't we just then how are we supposed to get close to each other? We've got to make that change, yeah. A change, yeah.
Great job, guys. I just want to challenge you and encourage you that this weekend and tomorrow that we just take some time just to remember and think about the impact that Dr. Martin Luther King made on our lives and our nation. And even as maybe as parents, have a conversation with your kids about the significance of what he did. Have a conversation with a loved one, somebody. This is important that we don't forget, that we remember the impact that he had. Well, welcome. We are so glad that you're here at Mission Community Church today. We have an incredible Sunday plan. My name is Kenny Conley. I'm the next generation pastor, and we are so glad that you're here. If this is your first time, or maybe the first time in a long time, we would love to meet you and connect with you. If you have any questions, we've created an environment specifically designed for you right out here in the lobby called The Hub, and it's a great place to ask questions, find out what we're about, how you can get connected, how you can get into a group, how you can serve, all those different things. So if you have any questions, we would love to meet you. Be sure to do that before you leave here today. Speaking of getting connected, maybe getting in a group, we have an event coming up on January 29th. It's Tuesday, 1 week from this Tuesday, 9 days from today. And it's an opportunity for you to get connected in the community here at Mission. Let me tell you why this is so important. In Next Gen, from 3-year-olds all the way through high school, we connect kids and teenagers in a group every single Sunday. Every single Sunday. If you have kids, they're meeting in a group today. And we do this because we believe that life change happens best in the context of a community. We believe that encouragement happens best in the context of a community. We believe that support happens best in the context of a community. And we believe in groups. And we believe that the best that Mission has to offer is in a small group. So if you're not in a group and you'd love to get connected, Group Link is a great way to do that. You can go to the website, missionaz.org, and you can sign up for Group Link. It's free, it's fun, and you'll walk away connected to some people that you didn't know before. So we'd love to have you there. Here in just a few more minutes, we got Chris and Diane are going to come up and lead us in a few more songs, and Joel is coming to lead us in week 2 of Losing Your Religion. But if you would stand up, maybe greet somebody next to you, give them a high five, fist bump, and tell them how glad you are to see them here today.
pierced your skin. You showed me that your love was always first. All before I ever found my faith. Jesus, you were my strength when I was falling away. Oh, your love purified me. Yeah, your love was always first. Grace comes rushing into my soul. You're taking control. Your love purified me. Yeah, your love was always first. When you laid behind the stone, when you walked from where you rose, and you led the way, you showed me that your love was always first. All before I ever found my faith. Jesus, you were my strength when I was falling away. Your love purified me. Yeah, your love was always first. Grace comes rushing into my soul. You're taking control. Your love purified me. Yeah, your love was always first. Your love, it was always first. Before I even knew you. No, not that I loved you, but that you loved me first. No, not what I earned, but what you freely gave away. While I was a sinner, you showed me what I'm worth. Jesus, when you bled, you died so I can live again. No, not that I loved you, but that you loved me first. No, not what I earned, but what you freely gave away. While I was a sinner, you showed me what I'm worth. Jesus, when you bled, you died so I can live again. Jesus, you were my strength when I was falling away. Oh, your love came to find me. Yeah, your love was always first. Grace comes rushing into my soul. You're taking control. Your love came to find me. Yeah, your love was always first. No, not that I loved you. Even while I was a sinner, your love was always first. Before he spoke creation, the God of heaven knew our names. Formed in his reflection, we are his glory on display. And his heart is good, he's always kind. With the cross he proved he's on our side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. And no matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. 'Cause we the key. And in his loving kindness, he chose the lowly and the weak. And his heart is good, he's always kind. With the cross he proved he's on our side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. And no matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. 'Cause we are the Lord's, and he will never forsake his own. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. Yes, we are, yes, we are. So when the lies speak louder than the truth, remind me that I belong to you. And when I can't see past the dark of night, would you remind me you're always by my side? Remind me, God, 'cause when the lies speak louder than the truth, remind me that I belong to you and only you. When I can't see past the dark of night, would you remind me you're always by my side? You're by my side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. And no matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. 'Cause we are the Lord's, and he will never forsake his own. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. As we stand here today, sons and daughters of God, I'd like to invite our team forward to receive an offering as we reach our arms around those around us with our resources in our community.
welcome or welcome back. So glad you're here, and hopefully you're glad you're here as well. If you're traveling on this holiday weekend, it's sometimes hard to translate things that happen in the room online, and I don't do this often. In fact, I didn't even do this in the first service, but I feel like our band and our worship team are so gifted in leading us in worship on the weekend. Are they not? It's just extraordinary. Sometimes I get lost over there in the midst of worship, and I'm like, oh gosh, I gotta preach. Like, what am I talking about? I gotta get up there in just a second. So if you weren't with us last week, we kicked off a brand new series. I do need to mention one other thing before we jump in. In the first service, my voice started to go a little bit just because I've been sick. I actually feel a lot better than I sound, but my voice started to go, and I started listening to everybody around me. You know how when it sounds like somebody needs to clear their throat, like you feel like you need to clear your throat? I'm listening to people the whole service like going, like trying to clear their throat. So I'll just let you know, if you clear your throat, it actually doesn't help me. So I just public service announcement, just so you know. We started a new series, and really, honestly, we got so much great feedback from a lot of you from the content from last week. So we decided to continue our series, and the fact that I've already written part 2, 3, and 4. So we're going at least 4 weeks on this. Last week, we kicked off this series, and one of the things we said last week is that religion has a problem. And religion has baggage, and I don't have time to unpack all that, but some of you, you didn't need the sort of the case for the baggage that comes with religion from last week, because you have your own. Your experience with religion, as you've connected with religion, you've experienced that before, and you didn't need me to make that case, but last week we talked about where a lot of that comes from and why a lot of that is, and how Jesus was actually different, and Jesus stepped into a landscape that was really overcome with religion as well, and he pushed back against, and he resisted. And so if you're somebody who sort of has felt like you've resisted religion at times, whether you're brand new to our church or whether you come a long time or whether you grew up in church or grew up in religion, if you're somebody who sort of pushes back against religion, you're in good company, because Jesus did the exact same thing. And there were certain things about religion that turned people off and also led people away from God's message to them. And one of the things we said last week in John's introduction to Jesus was one of the things that made Jesus different and Jesus unique, that oftentimes we leave behind as Christians, or we leave behind as followers of Jesus. And the reason we know is because of the feedback we've gotten from people outside the church, is that Jesus, what was different about Jesus is he was all grace and all truth all the time. And we've slipped into being a little bit all truth all the time at times with certain groups of people and about certain things. And when we're all truth all the time, it feels a lot more condemning. And someone would say, well, then we need to be like all grace. And it's like, well, all grace is sort of condoning. It's like anything goes, and everybody does what they want. Anybody can believe what they want. And Jesus wasn't about that either. One of the things that was unique about Jesus is he was all grace and all truth all the time. It wasn't a balance. He never cheapened down the truth. He never watered down the grace. It was all truth, all grace, all the time. And if you read your Bible, in the 4 accounts of his life, we see it over and over and over. Stories of Jesus being all grace and all truth all the time. Today, I want to back up just a little bit. I want to talk about religion in general. Some of you know this, but religion exists to explain the unexplainable. It's that there's certain things about the world, there's certain things about God, there's certain things about the afterlife, there's certain things about where do we come from. There's all these questions that we have that religion sort of exists to explain, or at least try to explain. Questions like, is there a God? And if there is a God, who is the God? And is he a personal God? Is there more than one God? Does this God know my name? Where do I stand with God? What does God require of me? What does God offer me? And the list goes on and on and on. In fact, today, my guess is you showed up today and you've still got questions. Whether you're somebody who's been a Christian a long time, or whether you just stepped in here, or somebody bribed you with lunch, or you didn't actually know you were coming to church. You just got in a car and you showed up here and you were like, what is this that somebody's brought me to? Here's the thing. What usually happens when people start asking questions, or people start trying to answer people's questions when it comes to religion, is it leads in one of 2 directions. It either leads towards things that are weird, and some of you have experienced that, I'll come back to that in just a second, or it becomes combative. Isn't this true? That like either somebody begins to describe something and you're like, I mean, that sounds so strange and so weird and I can't relate to any of that, or they begin to argue with you and it sort of takes on a combative tone. And some of you have experienced this. I mean, I don't know what tradition you grew up in, so if I offend somebody or I step on your toes, I'm not trying to do any of that, but like, I'll just say from my standpoint, when I see things that I don't see in the scriptures that seem super mystical, when I see people trying to contact spirits or slain in the spirit or strange chants or snake handling or things like that, I just think, okay, this is sort of weird stuff. And when I see religion that becomes superstitious, some of you have seen this, like rabbit foot Jesus, where it's like, don't miss church, or you make sure you need to give, or, cross yourself, or, whatever, cross your fingers, or point to the sky, maybe God will bless you. You know what I'm talking about? You look like you need an illustration. Hey, take a look at this.
I'm so hungry. I'm not the most religious guy. I sort of worship Eric Clapton and Ocho Cinco, but this was different. So I decided to see what it felt like to, pray.
Dear grilled cheeses, first of all, you're super delicious. Please, grilled cheeses, please let us win our first football game. It would mean so much to Artie, and I think you kind of owe it to him. I mean, you did sort of screw him in the leg department. And in return, Cheesy Lord, I'll make sure we honor you this week in Glee Club.
Thank you, grilled cheeses!
Now, I'm hoping most of us think that's weird, just really quick. But even if you don't think that's weird, some of you think it's actually more than weird. You think it's ridiculous. And others of you, you don't actually think it's weird. You think it's offensive. And in fact, some of you go, why would you show that in church? Here's why. Because that doesn't come from nowhere. Like, that actually comes from somebody either making fun of or poking fun of or saying, hey, look at how these people relate to their God. Isn't this ridiculous? Most of us answer that question is yes, it's ridiculous. But it happens, and it happened, and maybe this is hyperbole, but this is how some people view religion, specifically Christianity, because sometimes it just gets a little weird. And here's where I think that comes from, and this isn't the Bible, this is just my opinion. I think, I've just seen this over and over. I think the more uncomfortable or odd something feels, the more religious it feels to people. You ever notice that? It's like if somebody's like doing something really odd or really weird, or they're doing something that's just not like normal behavior, but in the name of God or connected to religion, they're like super religious or super spiritual, right? Like, because the more weird it is, the more religious it seems to be. And religion can lead us in that direction at times. The other thing it can do is it can be highly combative. And I probably don't need to give a bunch of illustrations of this, but it becomes a debate about who's right and who's wrong, and about what part of faith or what part of religion. And in the background, and we know this, in the background of all of these discussions and all of these debates is really the big question. The big question is who's going to heaven and who's going to hell, and who's right about God and who's not right about God, whose faith or religion or practices are completely in vain. And who's got it right, and in the end, they're gonna sort of be the winners of the religion game in the world. And that sort of sits in the backdrop of all of that. And in the name of religion, many people have been manipulative, which can be combative as well. And they try to leverage people, go like, if you don't, God won't. Or if you do, God will. And good luck, and drop some money in the plate on the way out, or whatever. People use things manipulatively like that. Or you've experienced people who are hypocritical, and they've been preaching something at you over and over and over, only for you to find out that they weren't living out what they were preaching in the first place. And you're so mad, and you should be, because there's an arrogance that goes with that. There's an arrogance oftentimes that goes with religion that says, when you learn a little bit more, if you stick around a little bit more, if you'll memorize some more verses or get some more information, you're not at this level yet, but eventually you'll make it to a certain level to where you have enough of the information. And that sort of arrogance that people aren't at a certain level, but if they keep working at it, they'll move up to it, is sort of off-putting. And what happens is religion often leaves us wondering, questioning, doubting, and for some of us, it causes us to walk away. Now, some of us press on because we look at other people who are more devout than even we are, and they don't seem to doubt, so we're like, maybe there's something we're missing, and so we keep pressing on, and you may be in that place. Or some of us, you may have been a place where you've walked away, or you're considering walking away, And you want to walk away completely. And I'll just tell you this, people who do that, initially, they feel incredibly free. Like there's this, I'm so glad to not be under that system anymore, to have to follow all that stuff or find out where I am or always be thinking about, am I in the good graces? Am I in or am I out? And you feel this freedom originally, but eventually you begin to wonder. And eventually that freedom begins to feel a bit empty. And you begin to wonder where you stand and what is true. And is there a God? And are you connected to him? Where do you stand with him? And the truth is, and this is what I want to acknowledge today, is everybody has questions. Everybody has questions. And the reality is everybody has opinions, don't they? Which is why things can get weird and combative at times. And the reason it gets combative is because everybody has questions and everybody has opinions and nobody has it wrong, right? Like when you talk to people, it's like they're so sure, especially if they have an answer to your question, they're so sure about their answer because if we're gonna grab onto an answer, we wanna be in the right category. We wanna be in the, this is gonna end well for me category. Of course we do. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is it causes us to be a bit arrogant and it causes specifically Christians, and I gave you some statistics last week, Christians to be seen by people outside as not only judgmental and not just as arrogant, but people who really think they have the corner of the market on the answers to all of life's questions. In fact, one of the greatest criticisms of Christianity is that Christians think they have all the answers. I mean, there's lots of questions, and how do you think you have all the answers to all of life's questions? I mean, there's lots of religions, there's lots of smart people. I mean, why do you think, how can you think you have answers, you have all the answers to all of the questions? And the truth is even when people don't have answers, you've seen this before, if a Christian doesn't have the answer, it's because you don't have enough faith. It's not because they don't have an answer. It's because if you believe this other thing or you trusted God in this other way, you would eventually come around to the fact that you don't need that answer. But that's not very satisfying. And sometimes it's weird, and sometimes it's combative. But the truth is, it wasn't always that way. In fact, I want to look at a conversation today. And it was a bit of a debate, it was a bit of a discussion as the Apostle Paul was introducing the message of Jesus to people who were sort of seen as the experts, some of the brightest minds of the time in religion and in philosophy. If you have a Bible, today more than ever, I'd love for you to follow along. If you have a Bible or a device, Acts chapter 17, we're gonna start in verse 22, and we're gonna look at a lot of verses. So I want you to follow along if you can. If not, if you don't have something with you, we're gonna put all the verses up on the screen here. But I wanna give you a context. I don't have time to look at the whole chapter, but I wanna give you a quick context for the first 21 verses that come before this. The context is this: Paul is in Athens, and this is just about 20 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. So about 20 years later, which is not a lot of time, Paul's walking around Athens because he had been going into Greek and Roman civilization preaching about the message of Jesus. Now, this is important to remember. These are people who don't have a background. They don't have history in the Old Testament religion, in the Old Testament God. So they don't have context for a promised Messiah and God's faithfulness to the Israelites in the past. They don't understand the promise that was made to Abraham that God was gonna be a blessing through him to the entire world. So they don't have context for any of that. So Paul's walking around and he's in the marketplace and he's in religious places, he's in synagogues, and he begins having discussions with people. And specifically, two groups of people, the Epicureans and the Stoics, that were some of the famous philosophers at the time, they began to debate him. Now, all you need to know is the Epicureans were the people that were sort of led by their heart, and the Stoics were led by their mind. So the Epicureans were more the emotional group. It's sort of, hey, whatever feels good, you need to follow pleasure. This is whatever leads to your greatest good. That's what truth is. And the Stoics were more about, no. It needs to be rational. It's got to make sense. It's got to be logical. And if it's logical, then that's obviously what the truth is. And so these Epicureans and Stoics, they begin to debate the Apostle Paul. And they ultimately led him to a meeting that they went to on a regular basis at the Areopagus. Some of you have seen this before. This is actually a place you can go to in Athens. It's this mountain, and it sits up really high, the city of Athens is out this direction. And so it overlooks the whole city. And the philosophers would gather there to put on trial some of the different ideas or new ideas. Specifically, when there were new ideas, this was sort of the court of public opinion where people would come around, and when people were bringing new ideas, they would get scrutinized in this place. And so they led Paul to that place where there's all these bright people who believe a lot of different things. And the Apostle Paul comes and they begin to ask him questions. And the Epicureans and Stoics probably began to represent some of the things that Paul had taught. But then at some point, after listening to some of their questions and some of their debate, Paul stood up. And he stood up in the meeting, verse 22, and Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, he wrote the fourth gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or third gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then Acts, Luke and Acts. By the way, just side note, in case you want to help win a trivia battle with your friends, most people think the Apostle Paul wrote most of the New Testament. In fact, I think I've even said that before, and it's actually not true. Luke, if you take the number of words, Luke wrote most of the New Testament. So if you want to be right with other people, you can be right. Paul stood up in the meeting in the Areopagus, and this is what he said. People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. He had been observing. He recognized they had lots of different gods. They had gods for everything, and they debated a lot of religion. Like, it wasn't that it was void of religion. They were super religious. He goes on, he says, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now, to Paul, this represented a sort of lack of confidence or assurance that they had. To Paul, this was sort of a just-in-case altar. We've got all these other gods that we worship. We've got all these other altars that we worship on, but we have an altar to an unknown God, because if there's a God out there that we haven't found that just so happens to be more powerful than some of these other gods, then the truth is we don't want to upset him. So let's, even if we haven't found him, let's just make sure that he knows that we know he might be out there somewhere. And even though that we haven't found him yet, we want to know him, and we're going to worship him anyway. And to Paul, he's going, I mean, this is a little bit weird, but there's a gap in your system of beliefs. For Paul, he recognized they still have questions. So Paul says this, so you're ignorant of the very thing you worship. Now in English, this sounds like a slam, but it wouldn't have to them. Paul's basically just saying, look, you're guessing. You still have questions. You're guessing about, who might be the right God, and you're sort of, you haven't buttoned this up. You don't have assurance about your own system of beliefs. And here's what I want you to know. This is what I'm going to proclaim to you. I want to fill in the gap. There's a gap in your religious system, and I want to help fill in the gap. The God, in fact, there's not a whole bunch of gods. You have a whole bunch of gods and a whole bunch of altars. There's just one God, the God of the world, who made the world and everything in it, is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything in it. This is his point. If there's a God that's all powerful, if you think there's an unknown God out there that might be more powerful than all your other gods, and you don't want to make him upset, so you've set up this altar for him, why would you create an altar or create an idol for gods that you created? Why would you reduce an all-powerful, all-creating God to something you created? That just doesn't even make sense. Like, why would you reduce him to somebody you can manipulate, or somebody who needs something from you so that you can get what you want from him? Paul's going, that's not how this works. That's not how the God, the unknown God, the one that sits in the gap in your religious system, the one that you still have questions about, that's not how he operates. Let me tell you how he operates. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times and history and the boundaries of their lands. Basically, completely opposing, by the way, their entire Greek and Roman worldview. Some of you've studied Greek and Roman history, and you know that there were lots of gods, and the world sort of evolved at the god's whim, on their whim. Sometimes it's by chance, but sometimes it's how they were feeling on a certain day, or how they wanted to treat the world. And the Apostle Paul's going, no, that's not how this works. Your time, your place, and the events that have happened in history are no accident. God is orchestrating the events of history, and God did this. He goes on, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us, which is ironic. Because this is what these people that he was debating, that he was having this discussion with, this is what they did day after day after day. They were looking, they were searching, they were hoping, they were discussing, they were questioning. They were regularly trying to figure out, who is the God? How do we make God happy? What does he want from us? What do we need to do for him? What does he promise to do for us? And then the Apostle Paul does something that I think is brilliant. And it's something you may have been encouraged against. In fact, if you're a Christian, you've sort of been told to not give credence to other things that other religions or other people outside of the Bible have said, even if they sound true. But that's not what Paul did. Paul goes on, he quotes two specific poets that were right about two universal truths. And they were two universal truths that actually pointed to the God that they assumed was this unknown God. He said, for in him we live and move and we have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Here's what Paul's saying is look, here's what you need to know. There is a connection. There's a very real connection between God and man. And it's because we're all made out of, or born out of, or created out of God. And the reason we have a connection with God and the reason we're connected to God is because he appointed a certain time and place in history for you, hoping that you would search and reach out for and try and find him. Now, this was originally written about Zeus. They believed that all people were Zeus's offspring. But Paul's going, that's not true. I would have named it if it was Zeus. This is the God of all gods, the God over all of your gods. So this could have been a little offensive. But Paul wasn't being combative. He says, okay, here's my point. Therefore, since we're God's offspring, if we come from God, just stay with me for a minute. If we come from God, we should not think the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human hands or by skill. I mean, many of your gods, you don't know exactly what they're like, and so you've created an image so that you can kind of display what your God is like or how they relate to the world or what their power is. And he's like, look, that's not the God of the world. You can't reduce him to that. If you're wondering what the God is like, he's made him known. But before I get to that, in the past, Paul says, in the past, God overlooked this type of ignorance, which again, in English, it sounds like he's like, slamming on them, but that's not what he's doing. He said in the past, this guessing, this wondering, this, hey, we hope there's another God out there. This, if you're out there, we kind of hope that you'll see our unknown altar and that you'll sort of be gracious toward us. Paul said, God overlooked that for a period of time. But now, as in like in the last 20 years, now things have changed. And now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Something new has happened. There's new information. And now there's a universal invitation to all people to repent of their misconceptions, to repent of this idea that there might be something out there that we're missing. And I want to leave a little bit of room just in case I'm wrong. Here's why. Now's the time. It's for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man, that's Jesus, he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Now, this is where, for some of you, and maybe even for some of the people Paul was talking about, this is where things get weird. And if this is weird for you, this is as weird as it gets. Some of them are going, wait, Paul, proof? We don't have proof of any of these other gods. These are sort of a hope so. Like, we think if we do this for this God and this is his deal, and if we give these types of offerings, this God likes these offerings, we're hoping that somehow these gods will show us favor. We hope so. Paul's going, no, there's proof. There's no more guessing. Proof moves us from hope so to know so. For Paul, the issue was Jesus. And for Paul, the proof was in an event. Now, if you've been around here at Easter time, you know every Easter, one of the things I focus on, I probably will forever, is the evidence that mounts for the resurrection of Jesus. Look at what happened, though, when he starts talking about this. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, they destroyed all of their idols and confessed Jesus is Lord. No. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. Of course they did. They'd never seen anybody raised from the dead before. In fact, one of their most powerful gods, Apollo, said once a man dies, the earth drinks up his blood, and there's no more resurrection. That's the end. So your hope is to have a good life in this life and to have the favor of the gods in this life. And the truth is that's about as good as it gets. But there were others that didn't sneer. And they said, we want to hear you again on this subject. We're curious. We like some of the things that you're saying. Some of the things you're saying make sense, and they begin to fill in the gap. We find out later that some of them actually believed, and they began to follow Paul. But after this was said, at that, Luke tells us, Paul left the council, which I'm like, you're not a very good evangelist, Paul. Like, you got to close the deal. Like, now's the time. Like, they've got questions. Why did he go? And where did he go? Like, did he have somewhere he had to get to? We know Paul wasn't married. Maybe he had a date. I don't know what the deal was with Paul, but they wanted to hear more, and they had more questions. Why did Paul leave? And I'm reading between the lines, but here's why I think he left. Because Paul had already given them the answer to what he believed was the question. That there is a series of questions that religion asks, that we ask. And not all questions are created equal. And there is a question. There's just a few questions. There's just a couple of things that are really, really important. And if you get the answer to these questions, then most of the other questions, it's like dominoes, most of the other questions begin to fall into place. Paul's message was a complete departure from the religious conversations they were used to having. Paul wasn't interested in debating Christianity versus all these other religions. He just said, clearly there's a gap. I want to tell you about the gap. I want to tell you about why you don't have assurance. And I want you to know I have confidence. I have assurance. They were accustomed to debating religious questions. Paul didn't want to debate questions. They wanted to ask questions like, who's right? Who's right about this? Well, what did Jesus teach about this? And what did several other people teach about that? And how can we debate those together? And Paul's going, I don't want to talk about that. You want to talk about who's right? I want to talk about who is Jesus. What do you believe about the person, the historical person of Jesus? Here's what I would say. Jesus was sent from God to be his representation. He was God on the earth. We don't have to wonder what God's like anymore. We don't have to wonder if there's a God or if there's a God who cares about us because he came into this world to rescue us. Well, the question we want to know is, who do you believe is true, or what do you believe is true about these different religions, and where do they converge, and where do they have it all right? And Paul's going, I don't really want to debate all that. I want to know what you think about what happened. What do you believe happened after Jesus died? That's the important question, because there's evidence for this. In fact, at their times, they had a little bit of a head start on us. They could actually travel. They could drive. They couldn't drive. They didn't have cars. They could get on camels, and they could go to Jerusalem. In fact, many of them did this. Some of the earliest converts of Paul went to Jerusalem and had conversations with people who were eyewitnesses to Jesus' death and people who were eyewitnesses to Jesus who was resurrected. Hundreds of people who saw Jesus after he was resurrected. Religion wants to debate the question, what does God want from us? Paul asks the question, do you know what God's done for us? This is different. This is why sometimes religion's weird and combative. It doesn't need to be. Because we're trying to debate who's right and who's wrong, and it's mostly about our security and about our assurance. Paul's going, no. When you settle who is Jesus, and you settle what happened through the resurrection, you discover something extraordinary about what God has done for us. And now you no longer live by the rules, because religion wants to ask, what philosophy do you follow? Or which philosophy or which set of rules do you follow? Paul's going, what's important to me is which person do you follow? This is different. I'm gonna make a significant difference in the world around me. I'm gonna make a significant difference maybe in the lives of other people, but I'm not gonna do it by convincing them they're wrong and convincing them to go in another direction. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna choose to follow Jesus. I'm gonna choose to live out his truth, and I'm not gonna do it because I have to follow a certain set of rules. I'm gonna follow Jesus because of what he's done for me. See, by focusing on the person of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, Paul shifted the conversation from theoretical, from philosophical to historical. He brought the theoretical, the spiritual into space and time just as God did. This person and this event put God in history, removing all doubt about God's presence, about God's concern for people, about God's standard. Paul would say, look, I know you got a bunch of questions, but all of your questions are answered in the person of Jesus. This is important. As Christians, we don't claim to have answers to all of life's questions. Some of us do. I mean, we pretend to have answers to all of life's questions. In fact, I feel this pressure. People come and ask me a question when they have a Bible question or they have a life question. I feel like I gotta have the answers to all their questions. And there are several great questions. In fact, some of you are sitting here today and you're like, yeah, if you would just let people raise their hand, I would ask you a really good question. And you probably don't have the answer to my question, and you might be right. But here's the thing, as Christians, we don't claim to have answers to all of life's questions. We claim to know the answer to all of life's questions. We claim to know the person who came to be the answer to life's most difficult questions. God didn't send answers to questions. He could have, but he didn't. God sent a person to be the answer to all of our questions. And when we're weird and we're combative, when people are weird and combative in the name of Jesus, you know what we actually do? We actually point people away from Jesus. Because Jesus wasn't weird and Jesus wasn't combative. Jesus wasn't some other than, he was different than any other man. But when Jesus came, the Bible tells us, we're gonna look at the scripture next week, he came in human likeness, in bodily form as a man. What's more relatable than that? He came in human form to remove the odd and mysterious. Jesus didn't come to debate answers to questions. He came to be the answer to life's most difficult questions. See, if you wanna know what God's like, this is what the Apostle Paul would say. If you wanna know what God's like, if you know somebody who wants to know what God's like, if you're getting into a debate about who's God and which God is the right God, and you know somebody who has questions about what God's like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to point them to look at Jesus. It's why when people of other religions and people even of other churches that would call themselves Christian, when they want to debate me, and this happens often when I have conversations with people and they find out I'm a pastor and they came up either in Christianity and left it or they're part of another religion, they always want to debate these like obscure things in like the Old Testament or something. And they want to debate me about these things, and I usually try to, as quickly as I can, I try to move them to the person of Jesus. Okay, I may or may not have answers to all your questions, but like, what do you think about Jesus? The truth is you should investigate Jesus. If you want to know if there's an afterlife, you don't have to live with blind faith. There was a resurrection, and there was actually significant evidence to the resurrection. And I'll just say this, if you're sort of new to church or newer to church, or this has sort of always bothered you, that may seem weird to you, but isn't that what you're hoping for? That's what we're all hoping for. Last I checked, the mortality rate's 100%. And all of us are hoping there's something good on the other side of that. So if that's weird, okay, great. Let's let that be as weird as it gets though, because that's what was weird. That was the only thing that was weird about Jesus from my vantage point. Jesus died and he came back to life. And if you wanna know where you stand with Jesus, Paul would say, you just need to trust in Jesus. You need to place your faith and trust in Jesus. And he doesn't say this to be combative. He doesn't say this to say, hey, everybody else is wrong. All the other religions are wrong. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second. But the proof of the resurrection proved to be the end of the debate for Paul. I don't need to debate you beyond that. If you wanna talk about whether Jesus actually died and came back to life, we can talk about that. And I'm gonna introduce you to a whole bunch of my friends who actually witnessed him die on the cross and actually had breakfast with him on the beach, who were there when he appeared to hundreds of people and taught them again. I want to introduce you to a whole bunch of people who were eyewitnesses to this. And you know what? Nobody's refuting it because there's so many people that are claiming this happened. It wasn't a few people that got in a room and made up a story. Again, we're going to come back to this in a couple of weeks. There's significant evidence to the resurrection. There's literary evidence. There's historical evidence. It proved for Paul to be the end of the debate. And if this is the issue for you, like if you're somebody who's here today and you're going, you know, my full trust in Jesus comes with, it's sort of hindered, or I'm being held back by really believing this event that happened, that Jesus came back from the dead. I'll just say this. You are standing on the crux of the issue. You are standing on the threshold of what it is to be a Jesus follower. The Apostle Paul would later write in Romans chapter 10 that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, that you will be saved. The Apostle Paul shrunk it all down. He goes, you want to know what you need to believe? If you want to know what you have to have faith in, if you believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of the living God, he was Lord, and you believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead, you will be saved. Now, if you're somebody and that's the issue, that's the thing, the second part of that's the part you're having a tough time, I want you to come back in 2 weeks. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that. But we're gonna post on social media and on the messages page. There's a couple of great resources that are fantastic. One's a little bit longer and a little more technical. So if that's you, there's a guy named Gary Habermas who is known as like the sort of source and authority on the resurrection. And then there's also another guy who actually spoke here several Easters ago. His name's Lee Strobel, who wrote a book called The Case for the Resurrection. And it's actually a short little booklet, which is easily readable. Both of them, brilliant men. Lee Strobel actually used to be an atheist, found significant evidence for the resurrection. But I want to give you some resources. But here's the thing. I want to invite the rest of you, if you're not somebody who's in that place where that's the debate for you, in the same way that Paul said, I would invite you not to be weird. We need to, the religion that we need to shed is the religion of weirdness and the religion of combativeness. I mean, you don't have to be combative. Our job after we look at Jesus and investigate Jesus and place our trust in Jesus is to simply follow Jesus. Do you know that following Jesus is actually how we discover answers to life's most difficult questions? That the more you follow Jesus, the more, when I say follow, put into practice the truth of what he taught us and how he taught us to live. The more you put into practice and you trust and follow Jesus, the more you begin to discover the truth of the answers to your life's most difficult questions. In fact, you know this because you do this with your kids. You've experienced something, you know how something works, you know what they should do about a certain situation, and it doesn't make any sense to them. And they have questions, or you're like, no, you just need to do this. And they're gonna ask you question after question after question, and you're finally like, just trust me. And when they do, they come back, they go, how did you know? And you're like, because I've done this before. And I'm so glad you trusted me. And when they don't, you're like, why didn't you listen to me? You didn't trust me. I think that's the way it works with God. Some of us have questions that we will never get answered until we decide to take steps of faith to follow Jesus. But you don't have to do it blindly. Paul says there was proof that Jesus is who he said he was, that God came in the form of man. The resurrection proves it for us. Now, if you're somebody who's going, yeah, but what about when the Bible's under attack or there's certain truths that are under attack? I mean, shouldn't we defend some of those truths? And we're gonna come back to that in this series. In fact, in 2 weeks, we're specifically gonna talk about that very idea. And shouldn't, that can feel combative, but we need to defend the Bible. We need to defend truth. I'll just leave you with what St. Augustine said. This is the short answer to that question. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. If you let it loose, it will defend itself. I guarantee it. Do you know how we let the truth of God loose in our lives? We trust and we follow Jesus. I don't understand how this makes any sense in my relationship. I want you to trust me. I don't understand how this is gonna make any sense in my finances. I want you to trust me. I don't understand how this is gonna make sense for my future, how this is gonna go well for me. I want you to trust me, and I'm not asking you to do it blindly. I gave my life. I conquered sin and death on your behalf, and I'm asking you to trust me. I came to be the answer to the greatest dilemmas and all the biggest questions in life. Next week, we're gonna talk about the fact that Christians oftentimes are criticized for being so narrow-minded. It's a little different take on this idea that how can you claim to have one way, the way? How is it that you can be so narrow-minded and say that all these other people are people that are not going to heaven, God's not pleased with them? I mean, how can you say all other religions are wrong? And I would say this, I'm actually not saying that all other religions are wrong, not completely. In fact, there's something all major world religions have gotten right. And we're gonna talk about that next week. So let me pray for you, and then we'll be done. God, thank you. Thank you that you didn't leave us to a hope so, that you actually provided a way that we could know that you're somebody we can trust, somebody we can place our hope in, somebody we can follow. God, I pray for somebody who's here today and they've allowed all of their questions from keeping them to take that first step of faith and place their faith in you. I pray today, as a result of today, they would wrestle with the question of who is Jesus? That they would wrestle with the question, what do I believe about the resurrection? What do I believe about this event that Paul claimed happened in history? And I pray that you would meet them in that, and you would supply the faith that they need to understand and to believe and to begin to trust and to follow in you. God, I pray for people who are here today, and we're so tempted to find ourselves moving towards the weird or moving towards the combative, especially with people who are around us. I pray that we would recognize that when we trust and when we follow, it's not only the way that we find answers to life questions, but it's the way that you allow us to influence other people, and that by us trusting you and following you, other people find the answer to life's biggest dilemma, to life's most important question. There is a God. He does care. He has come. He's provided a way, and he's given a free gift for every single one of us. Pray that we would be people who would trust and obey, we trust and follow, not because we're following rules, but because we're grateful for what you have done for us in Jesus. We pray in his name. Amen. Amen. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next Sunday.